So yeah. Awesome. I think we've got a few people online as well. But yeah, welcome. Welcome to Data and Analytics Wednesdays. It seems like there's a lot of new people here as well. Can I get a show of hands of like who's here for their first time? Quite a lot of people. It's pretty cool. We've got a few people online as well. So we're doing this remotely. So we've got a Zoom, bit of a hybrid setup. So our first speaker is actually down with COVID. So he's going to be doing it virtually, but thankfully we've got a pretty good A/B setup. Yeah, Data and Analytics Wednesday. We get together once a month, so every second of the month, every second Wednesday of the month, I should say. We do talks, an open mic at the end. It's also just a really good way to network with everyone in the industry. You're all probably here maybe for GA4 as well, but it's also just being part of an awesome community. So we kind of run conferences once a year as well, just like a free to attend thing. And we all just get together just because this is a really good way to learn off each other and just meet other people in the industry. Yeah. So yeah, you're probably all excited for Google Analytics 4. I'm sure you've got some sort of experience with it or some sort of knowledge. Tonight's solely themed on that. So we're going to dive a bit deeper into it. So we're going to have two talks. The first one is going to be Simon. So I'll kind of talk about that in a moment, but he's going to do a bit of an intro to GA4, all the stuff you might want to know about it, all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to have a cool panel with a few awesome people with great experience across the industry. So what they love, what they hate, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be fun. Yeah, we'll jump into it. And also, thanks to all of our sponsors as well. So we've been running this for quite a while now, I think like 8 or 9 years or something. So we, there's a bunch of volunteers. You might see us with these lanyards. So there's a couple around. But yeah, we just do this for free just because we're obviously passionate about the space. We've learned a lot through the community. And so, we like being a part of this, but actually we haven't been able to do it without these guys as well. So Canva's obviously given us the space and the drinks and the food and all that sort of stuff. And some of these other the sponsors have actually been supporting us and helping us with free drinks and the venue for quite a long time now. So yeah, really big thanks to those guys. Yeah. Awesome. So I'm just going to cross over shortly to Simon. But yeah, just a quick intro to him. So Simon's one of the OGs of Data and Analytics Wednesday. He's probably been doing this since almost the start, like 8, 9 years or something like that. Yeah, knows the space really, really well. He's a digital analytics specialist from the ABC, a wealth of knowledge as well. So it's going to be a pretty good talk. So yeah, we'll cross over to him.
Hi there, folks. Hope you're all doing well. Let me just share my screen as well. There we go. And then if you pin that for everyone, that should show up for you guys in the room. Can everyone hear me? Just making sure. Yeah. Okay. In the room as well. Yeah.
A little bit louder if you can, but yeah. Also, thanks to Simon because he's currently got COVID, so feeling a bit under weather. So this is how passionate he is about data and analytics. Great. Thanks, Simon.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, folks. I was hoping to be in person for this, which would have been a lot of fun. I quite like our events. We've been doing them for 9 and a bit years now. We're coming into our 10th year next year. But yeah, I've got COVID. Fortunately, it's pretty mild, so I'm happy about that. I want to take you through kind of the basics of GA4. We probably won't be able to do this as much of an interactive kind of thing, unfortunately, just because of being remote. But I'll take you through this stuff. And then actually, if you've got questions, it's probably even better to ask the experts. I don't know GA4 enormously well myself, but I've been able to scoop out the brains from a whole bunch of really smart people around who've helped me learn this stuff. So let's go in. Google Analytics 4, what is it? So what's going on? What is Google Analytics 4? So the Universal Analytics, or GA3 as we call it now, that we know and love, will stop processing new data on the 1st of July 2023. So you've got a year, less than a year now. The clock is counting. And from then on, you'll have at least, is what Google's saying, 6 months of access to your data. After that, you're on your own. GA360, so the paid version of Google Analytics, that you've got a little bit longer. You've got till the 1st of October 2023. We're not enormously sure how long that data will be available. So we're not hugely okay. We don't know. If anyone knows, that'd be great to let us know, but probably in the panel section. Google Analytics 4 is the thing that Google have said is the replacement. Oh, wait. You can't see my slides. I'm just seeing the room there. You haven't got my slides there. How do we make my slides? What's going on? Okay, not my screen. Okay, let me share again. I don't know what happened there. Is that working? Has that got my slides?
Yeah, we're all good.
You got it? Okay, you got my slides. Oh, awesome. So GA4 is the replacement for Google Analytics 3. So that's the kind of backup. Let's actually just start my video. Okay, cool. Data, this is really important. The data that you have in Google Analytics 3 will not be in Google Analytics 4. So just be really clear on that. You have to do some work. You have to make some changes. You have to re-implement tracking. Now, depending on how complicated your setup is, that could be really easy. Like if you're in Google Tag Manager and you don't do much, that could be really simple. If you only deal with the web, that can be really simple. If you've got to deal with lots of other platforms, that could be a lot of work. So just be aware that you've got to do something or you will stop having data recorded. So what's going on here? Why is Google doing this? Why are they actually making this change? So the big one is that identifiers that we're used to, the things that allow us to go, this device, this mobile phone, is this device now, and then when another event happens tomorrow, and then when an event happens next week. So cookies, device IDs, all of those things, they're all going away. We have less and less access to them. If people are using Safari, it's actually kind of difficult to get a cookie to stick for more than 7 days. It can be done, but it's kind of hard. If people are using Brave or Firefox, it's similar. And even Chrome is basically getting rid of cookies. On Apple devices, if you want to have access to the IDFA, so the device ID for iOS devices, you've got to ask people explicitly, and somewhere between 10 and 25% of people say yes, if you're lucky. Google haven't announced what they're going to do, but they're getting rid of their ad ID, so their device ID as well, or at least making it more restrictive. Plus, there is actually the option to just say no on the Android platform. So those identifiers that we've relied on for a long time, they're disappearing. So that's one of the reasons that Google's doing this. Another is that the EU is getting really, really serious about privacy and spanking Google royally. They're really, really kicking their ass quite a bit. Austria, France, Italy, Belgium, the list is probably longer since I created this slide earlier today, are basically saying that if you send an IP address to a US entity, you're breaking the law. With more nuance, there's a whole bunch of problems with Google Analytics being a US company and the data being available offshore, so outside the EU. Other countries are also getting kind of serious about this as well. So that's one of the reasons as well. And there's also a whole bunch of regulators around the world who are starting to kick up about Google's kind of monopoly in this space. So if you think about it, they've got a monopoly in search, they've got a near monopoly in advertising, or at least digital advertising that's not Facebook, and them having another way of viewing a pretty serious chunk of the behavior of users on the internet. You can see why those three things might be a little bit suspect for monopoly regulators. So all of these things mean that Google's kind of going, okay, we were slowly migrating people to this new platform. Now we're actually going to draw a line and go, we're going to do it really quickly. So what I would ask is, was their heart ever really in this? Let's have a product for people who want to run websites. You know, we'll talk about that in a little bit later. So let's talk about the golden age of tracking. When I first got into this digital analytics game, what really excited me is that suddenly we had this view of what people were doing on your website. So rather than having to ask people, you know, to basically ask them what they thought of your website, we suddenly had this way of kind of looking over their shoulder and seeing exactly what they did. That was pretty cool. But once you start getting into the detail, the tracking's actually always been a bit crap. There's actually been loads of limitations that we've always had, and we've kind of always known about them, especially those of us that are really heavily involved in this stuff. But the kind of thing we fooled ourselves with was that this stuff, we were tracking everything, which was an amazing advance compared to other media where people were doing things and tracking things. So we're tracking everything. So, you know, we fooled ourselves that the tracking was perfect. But actually, there were always big holes that you could drive a bus through in this stuff. We really never did solve the multiple devices, multiple browsers problem. We never solved that problem of, say, someone sees an ad on their mobile phone and then they go and use their desktop to buy the product. We really can't join those dots. So, you know, we never really got there. People can run ad blockers so that there's a whole chunk of audience that we never actually see. And then there's the vexed question of how do you actually attribute all of those sales, especially when you've got imperfect knowledge, right? So we're going to say, hey, we know all of the ad impressions before the sale. Actually, we only know some of them, and we don't know which ones we don't know. We have no idea of the magnitude of the stuff we don't know. Other industries cope with this kind of complexity, yeah? This is not a new problem. You know, TV, radio, outdoor, billions of dollars annually is transacted in these industries, selling advertising based on, well, frankly, pretty sketchy methodologies. TV for a long time was done with paper diaries. TV's come a long way. They're actually not so bad. Radio is still done with paper diaries. Did you listen to John Laws yesterday? Did you listen to Alan Jones yesterday? That kind of question. Outdoor advertising is done with someone sitting with a clipboard next to a billboard one day a year and marking off how many people walk past it and how many cars drive past it. You know, these things are pretty simplistic, but they are accurate enough for the people who are spending money on advertising to still continue spending billions of dollars on this stuff. In-store retail, you can't know every person who comes into the store and follow them around the store, although there are some creepy things that retailers are getting investigated about right now in this space. They've dealt with this by doing, you know, spot checks and sampling to find out what's actually going on. So what Google is actually kind of saying, and it's kind of sensible, you can kind of get where they're coming from, is that we'll never have all of the data. We never will have everything. So it's not coming back. We're not going to get all those identifiers back. Anyone who's tried to do creepy tracking to get around this stuff has kind of basically got stomped on eventually. So how do we achieve the outcomes we need, which is, did my advertising work? Does my website work? Where does my website not work? How do we achieve those outcomes with this kind of patchy data that we've got? So what's GA4 itself actually there? What is it? So GA4 is basically Firebase Analytics. So if you're familiar with Firebase Analytics, which is Google's platform for measuring behavior inside mobile apps, Firebase is kind of a platform with a whole bunch of tools for mobile developers. The analytics part of that is Firebase Analytics. GA4 is basically an evolution of that. Google's been frantically building stuff on that to try and get it somewhere close to parity with universal analytics and stabilizing it and making it kind of work. And we'll kind of go into how successful they've been on that. And I think it'd be really interesting later on to hear what the panel has to say about that. All right. Okay, so what's the good things? Let's look at the good things. There are plenty of good things. One decision that Google have made is to build an event-centric model. So what's an event-centric model? Rather than there being a couple of kind of God events that have special attributes attached to them in their data model. So by that, I mean things like page views, which are these special events that represent a page. And because they're special events, they attract things like time spent, and they start a session and things like that. Instead of that, everything's kind of an event. So if you go and look in a fairly plain implementation of GA4, you'll see these standard out of the box events of page view, session start, user engagement, first visit. They're all events. Everything's an event. So session start is an event that happens when the first event comes in. And it's kind of defined by the client what that means. So the model's kind of more open and you can see what's going on, and there's less kind of magic going on. So this is a good thing. Next up, web and app are together at last. So if you're familiar with the universal analytics data model, websites were one thing, apps were another thing, and never the twain shall they meet. Even things that they had page views with page names and page URLs and page titles, but apps have screen names and screen views, screen space view that is, as opposed to page view no space, screen space view, and screen space names, and they can't kind of be mixed and matched. So while you might have had the temptation to go, okay, screen, page, we'll consider them the same, they were actually all different dimensions with different metrics accruing to them. So now web and app is one kind of thing. The exploration reports that are in there, so you may have seen these in Google Analytics as well, they're actually pretty good. So this kind of gives you a Tableau-esque drag and drop way of dealing with stuff, like so of building your own reports. So they're pretty good. Those reports are quite good. Next up, signals. So signals is a feature that you can optionally turn on in the configuration, and if effectively it dips into Google's identity database. So when someone logs into all of their Google products, it stitches together all of those identifiers that are in use, and allows you to actually use that. What that gives you is a whole bunch of really interesting things, like being able to see a person's behavior across multiple devices. And Google's kind of trying to work on this in a privacy respecting way where they kind of know this information and they share the outcome of that with you, the person running the website, but without actually giving you the raw material that they generated that with. And this is a running theme. There's a whole bunch of stuff where just trust us, we're Google, is kind of the answer to any questions. Ditto, you can do cross-device targeting, so you can target ads across to an individual, but using all of the devices that Google's identified for them. And it uses clever AI models, again, trust us, we're Google, to fill in the gaps where we don't know, where we aren't able to go, this device. And that can happen for a whole bunch of reasons. The person might not have logged into Google products, or they may not have given permission for signals to actually operate. So they can opt out of being included in this data pool. So there's kind of model reports, and that's kind of the magic that GA4 uses to kind of get around the problems of we're losing identifiers. And this stuff might even be legal in the EU if we're really lucky. I suspect a whole bunch of this stuff is going to get challenged because it's an opt-out model rather than opt-in, and the EU does not like that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Now we're going to look at the stuff that's just different. What's actually, it's not necessarily good or bad, but it's different. You're going to have to learn to, you're going to have to adjust to how this stuff works differently. So engagement metrics have changed quite a bit. And a lot of this is kind of because the data model now has to accommodate app and web things going on. So the engagement metrics we're used to are mostly based around web stuff. So, scroll depth and things like that. These new engagement metrics also accommodate and kind of try to fold in a uniform way how you work across both those environments. So engaged sessions is a new metric, which is a session that's longer than 10 seconds or that had a conversion or that had more than 2 page views, 2 or more page views. So that's an engaged session. And then we end up with an engaged session per user metric, derived metric, which is kind of the equivalent of pages per session in the old web-centric paradigm. Similarly, engagement rate is the percentage of sessions that were engaged. And that kind of replaces bounce rate, although bounce rate is that formula flipped upside down. And apparently bounce rate is actually going to be available as well. So percentage of sessions that were engaged is kind of what we're talking about, or percentage of sessions that were not engaged. So you can see they're trying to accommodate the 2 different environments, that app and web environment. Then you've got average engagement time. So that's the amount of time that was where the app or the web page was in focus. So it was actually the active app or the tab was actually in view. Is kind of the idea. And that kind of gets to the average session duration or the time on page metrics. There's more stuff that's different. Cross-domain tracking, you now have to set that up inside the GA4 settings instead of inside the JavaScript. The thing is that cross-domain tracking was never a great feature anyway. So just to be clear on how that works, cross-domain tracking in web would pass through a token inside the URL that would be your Google Analytics ID and would pass that into the new website so that your session could be continued across in that new site. It only works when you go from one website directly to another website. And that there are actually very few situations where that happens. Normally what you want to do is you've got 2 different brands and you want to know how much audience is shared between them, and Google Analytics just can't do that, and that hasn't changed. So that's something. Attribution. So by default, attribution is now the data-driven model. If you're aware of the multi-channel stuff in Universal Analytics, all the different models that you could use, the data-driven version is now the default as opposed to last click, which again kind of makes sense if you think about it from the perspective of Google is trying to manage the issue that people are like the data is imperfect. So it kind of makes sense. All right, now let's go into the bad stuff. What's bad? What's missing for starters? So this is a big one. Having all your data inside the standard reports. You kind of think that'd be a nice thing to have, right? Well, guess what? You can't. Instead, what you end up with is these other rows. So what's happening here? This is an issue called cardinality. So Google defines this as the number of unique values assigned to a given dimension. So in this case here, we're looking at page names. So this is the ABC, and you can see that other is our number 4 page name. Of course, there's no single page that is that other. It's the long tail of stuff that the ABC has. So what's happening here is that if you go above a certain amount of unique values in one day, the dimension is considered high cardinality. And because in computer science terms, high cardinality is hard to deal with, Google groups it all into other. What's kind of hilarious about this is that those of you who know the Adobe days when Adobe migrated to their new platform about 8 or 9 years ago, they did exactly this as well, and they got smashed for it, and it caused huge confusion, and people were like, why are we paying all this money for Adobe when you're going to do this? I can't have all my data. And yet Google, here we are. The really important thing is that when challenged on this, Google are saying, well, if you are a big enough organization to have high cardinality, you should be doing your reporting in Data Studio using BigQuery raw data out the other end anyway. So just hold on to that one, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, what else is missing? Views. This is a big one. So views are a way of taking a single property or app in Google Analytics and filtering it different ways. So this is commonly used because you've got many sites or many different business groups with different parts of your websites, and they want to see just their stuff. So you use a view to kind of filter it off into different places. That's gone. There are some workarounds for getting roughly there, but the power of filters in Universal Analytics is not there. So it's much simpler. The default reports are crap. So this is probably the case for Universal Analytics too, but the default reports are particularly useless. You get some really, really cookie cutter kind of views. They're really not very smart. Plus, you can't do things like drill downs, you can't do regular expressions, all of that kind of stuff is just gone. So that's worth knowing. There is some good news about that though. The Explorer views reports are kind of good. Calculated metrics are out. Annotations, this is where you can say, hey, on this date, this thing happened. I don't know how heavily used a feature that is, but if you actually use that feature, it's really handy for being able to remember, oh, that was the day that we launched that product. Oh, that was the day the servers went down. You can put in kind of notes on particular date ranges so that hopefully your audience, your stakeholders can see why there's weird blips in the data. Custom channel grouping. So this is where you can group your traffic sources and put them into their own groups. Now you get the default ones, and that's it. So that's gone. All right, what else have we got? Data imports. There are still data imports. This is particularly where you want to deal with the metadata around content or events. Previously in Universal Analytics, you could upload stuff against your pages, so particular pages on your site. You can't do that now. That said, you can do data imports on things like products and users and the like. So it's just kind of a different set of things. But if you rely on that feature, you're going to have to find another way. And there are some other ways around that. Campaign data uploads in particular, that's something that some people use very heavily, and that's not there anymore. And the thing that really surprises me, or at least really surprises me when you think about the paid version of Google Analytics 4, is some of the arbitrary limits that you get on stuff. So for example, you can have 500 distinctly named app events. And once you've created 500, that's it. You're done. You can't create any more, and you can't delete them, which is kind of crappy. For those of you who used Firebase, this will be familiar because that was a limitation they had as well. I can see having limitations like this, as with the cardinality on a free product, but on a paid product, I kind of want those tools. And Google has shown no indication that they're going to fix this. You can only have 25 parameters on an event, which just seems like a small and, again, arbitrary limit. Again, if you're paying, maybe they could like take the limits off. And you can only have 25 properties attached to users. And again, you can't delete. So this just seems kind of weird. What about stuff that's not there yet? So there's a whole bunch of things that Google have indicated they are going to create, but it's not there yet. So I guess this is probably okay. But if you're jumping in today expecting to use GA4 for Reels, you'll you're kind of out of luck right now. So these are, if you've got signals enabled, there's a whole bunch of features that aren't there yet. And you'll see a common thread in these because signal is a way of violating your audience's privacy. These are all things that give you the raw data behind that. So BigQuery export, dashboards, custom reporting, custom tables, segments, user IDs. So Google is just really working on how they do this in a privacy preserving way. So it's kind of understandable, but it's not there yet. And my real bugbear is there's a little sidebar on the side, and to get there, you roll your mouse over it and it expands. But if you've got a nice big screen like I do, nice wide screen, you can keep things open, right? It just annoys the shit out of me. Anyway, that's just all right. So what's the verdict? So this is my opinion on what this is. Who's it good for? If you buy ads primarily from Google and drive traffic to some outcome, you know, the classic e-commerce case or leads or whatever it is, Google Analytics 4 is probably a pretty good idea. It's probably a good product for you. Of course, if you're buying ads, you're probably buying them from Google, or you're buying them from Facebook, who don't expose any of this stuff to anyone outside Facebook anyway. So you're not going to get a better service from anyone else. And Google actually does know who your audience is able to stitch them across their devices and do a pretty good job of it. So if you're already trusting Google that much, it's probably not a terrible decision. So, you know, if you're an e-commerce doing that, it's probably, you know, a reasonable idea. Is it not good for though? So I can tell you, media organizations, it's not a great fit. The cardinality thing is a real problem for starters. The default reports being garbage, they're garbage now, but they're even more garbage in GA4. If you're a small business and you don't have a dedicated data team who can dig into SQL and build your data studio or other SQL client reports, you're going to struggle a bit. And if you have high traffic and or high cardinality in anything you do, you're gonna struggle. There's definitely going to be problems. Basically, what it means is that you're going to have to build all your own reports. And I have to say, isn't that kind of what we're paying for the product for if you're using the paid product? So my personal view is that Google Analytics 4, it's not half-baked. Actually, it's not even really quarter-baked yet. They've got a lot of work to do. And given that they've started the clock, and anyone who wants a year's worth of data needs to be, well, for the free version live 13 days ago, and for the paid version live in a few months, that's pretty tough. And that brings me to the next point, which is that you've basically got to re-implement. You've got to start again. Now, if you're in Google Tag Manager and you've got a really good implementation, that actually can be pretty simple. It's not that hard. But if you've got apps, suddenly it's hard. If you've got lots of apps and you've got platforms that Google Analytics doesn't even support, and I'm putting my hand up as saying we have that, it's actually a big deal. It's a lot of work. This is effectively taking, you know, half of our platforms and starting again. You're going to end up with a hard break in any series of metrics that you've got. The metrics that are in use now versus the metrics in GA4, they're different. The definition has changed. So you're going to have a whole bunch of stakeholders who are going to go, why has that changed? What's more, they're going to have to use different tools across that timeline. So with all of that, I actually think if you're going to have to re-implement and it's a product that's not, you know, a slam dunk, well, you actually need to go out and look at the market and see what else is out there. You need to actually explore the whole market. So go and see what other products are out there. Given you're going to have to build all your own reports yourself, well, you could use something that just is an event logger and only does that, and then build your own reports. So I think that's an option. Of course, that's risky too. So if you're in one of those groups where it is a slam dunk, as in ad-driven, outcome-based, look, Google's going to look after you. They want you to buy more of their ads. that is for them the purpose of Google Analytics, they're going to look after you. For everyone else, well, I'm not so sure they've got their eye on you and that they actually care about you. And my last point is, I wonder, has Google Analytics lost its sponsor at the big table at Google? It's pretty clear that they've been spending a lot of money on this product with not a lot of revenue. And certainly if you were to look at their consolidated financials, you know, you'd have your big bar for Google Ads, your big bar for YouTube. You'd have a fairly big chunk smaller for Google Cloud Platform. And then you've got Google Analytics, which is this tiny little thing over here. And, you know, the amount of revenue it makes is minuscule. So anything that requires execs to be looking at means that there's an opportunity that they're looking at something that's not making them that much money. And now that the European Union have come knocking and started putting in quite heavy fines, that'll be taking up their time. So I wonder if whoever it was that was always going, no, this is the right thing to do, we have to do this, it actually justifies our ad business. I wonder whether that person's gone or lost power. I don't know. So my biggest worry about this is, you know, is this product, you know, Google has a habit of killing popular products. Is it even going to exist in a few years' time? I think that's a risk that we need to weigh up when you're making your decisions about whether to re-implement on this new platform. So that's it from me. There are some questions I can see in the Zoom chat. I'm not going to answer them, but we might feed them into the to the panel session because it's a bit tricky. But thank you, everyone. I can't hear any feedback, so I'll pass on back to Josh now. Thanks very much.